Chapter 26. A Dismal Enterprise, and its Melancholy Result. Martha Dowling punished more severely than she deserved. Very wild projects conceived by Miss Brotherton, and speedily put in execution. It is now necessary that the narrative should briefly return to the period of Miss Brotherton's arrival at Milford Park, after unsuccessful expedition in pursuit of Mchl. There was no needless delay between this return to her home and the communication to Miss Armstrong and Edward of the dismal news of which she was the bearer, nor was there any consultation on this occasion concerning the mode of her reaching Hoxley Lane. Poor Mary had greatly advanced in independence of spirit within the last few months, and she had encountered all the military quartered within 20 miles, with the Dowling family marching in procession at their head, she would have quietly driven through them all, with carriage windows up, perhaps, but with no great precaution, except, indeed, an order to the coachman to drive on without stopping, let them meet who they would. The carriage was at the door the morning after their return, and Miss Brotherton had not yet named her intended expedition to Mrs. Tremlett. "Are you going out without me, my dear?" said the old lady on hearing it announced. "I am going to the widow Armstrong, dear nurse," replied the heiress. "Your presence cannot help me through this dreaded visit. Then why should I make you share the pain of it?" "Why, my dear? Because I am of no earthly use, and had better die at once if I cannot be of some little comfort to you at such a time as this. Why, don't I know all about it, and how you must feel at this very moment, just as well as you do yourself, Mary? Surely it was a foolish notion to leave me here enjoying the armchair and the footstool and the flowers, while you are having your heart broken by telling that poor pale body that the child she loved so dearly is dead and gone forever." "If you could save either her or me a pang, Nurse Tremlett, I would not thus have spared you," replied Miss Brotherton. "However, you shall go with me, dear friend. It is quite like yourself to wish it, and in truth I might have guessed that you could not have remained easy and quiet at home while I was so engaged. And poor Fanny! I have left her very busy with Martin, assisting in arranging the little room I have assigned her near my own. Shall we tell her where we are going, in case she should come in here to look for us?" "My dear Mary, if you will take my advice, you will let her go too. If you do not, the whole of this terrible talk will have to begin all over again, for of course when Mrs. Armstrong hears that you have got with you the only person who can tell anything about her boy, she will be restless and anxious to see her, and then won't it be all over again, Mary?" "It will indeed, dear nurse. You are very right and very wise in this. She shall go with us, poor child, though it will be a dreadful task for her," replied Mary. "And would you rather take it, dear, all on your own shoulders? I do not doubt that, only you don't know how to manage it," replied Mrs. Tremlett. "But there is another thing, Mary, that I have been thinking of," continued the kind-hearted old woman, "and that is the other poor boy. I'll engage to say he has never missed school for an hour after what you said to him about exerting himself. I saw how he took it, and therefore you may depend upon it that he is at the schoolhouse now. Then just think, my dear, what his going home will be after you have told all. Poor creatures, it makes one's heart sick to fancy it. If I were you, Mary, I would send for him, tell him everything at once, and then take him home to his mother." Miss Brotherton instantly rose and rang the bell. "Do not say you are of no use, my dear good creature," said she. "How infinitely better this will be than the hurried, thoughtless plan which I had sketched." A message was accordingly dispatched to the schoolhouse to summon Edward Armstrong, and in a few minutes he stood before them. Most true it is that there is something holy and imposing in the presence of sorrow. It would be difficult to imagine any entrée into the boudoir of Miss Brotherton which would have inspired a feeling both in her and her friend so nearly approaching awe as did that of Edward Armstrong. "There is no need to tell him, poor fellow," exclaimed Mrs. Tremlett, mournfully shaking her head as she saw the sudden and eloquent change in Edward's countenance the moment he looked in the face of Miss Brotherton. "There is no need to tell him. He knows it already." "He is dead, then?" said the boy, his pale lips parting, as it seemed, with difficulty to pronounce the words. "Please, ma'am, let me go away." He looked as if he were unable to sustain himself, and Mary, really fearing he might fall, started from her seat, and throwing her arms around him, almost carried him to the sofa. "No, no, my poor Edward," she said, "do not go away. Stay with those who love and pity you. Poor Mchl is dead, Edward, and we must all try to support your mother under the dreadful news." "How do you know he is dead?" cried Edward, staring up and looking almost sternly at his benefactress. "How do you know that they have not hid him away where you cannot find him, that they may torture him, and work him to the bone when there is no one by to see?" "I know that he is dead, but too well, Edward," replied Mary gently. "I have brought home with me a little girl who worked in the same factory, and who knew him well. He died of an infectious fever that killed many, many more. I am going to take this little girl with me to your mother, Edward, that she may question her, if she wishes it, about poor Mchl, and I wish that you to go with us, my dear boy. It is better that your poor mother should have you with her." "You are going to tell mother?" said the boy with a shudder. "Yes, Edward, it must be done, and the sooner it is over the better. Your mother is a good woman, and a pious Christian, my dear boy. She will know and feel that all that can befall her is the will of God, and when she remembers this, she will rise above her sorrow, and thinking of the better world hereafter, will be able to say, 'His will be done.'" "Yes, ma'am, if it does not kill her first," answered Edward. "Indeed, I think a great deal will depend upon you, dear Edward, as to her manner of bearing it. If she sees you sink, be sure she will sink too. But if you make her feel that she still has a beloved child to live for, to whom life may yet be a blessing, she will cease to repine for the loss of one child, for the sake of making the other happy." Edward slowly and silently shook his head, but after the melancholy silence of a minute or two, he said, "I will do my best, ma'am." The scene which followed beside the bed of the poor widow was one of such deep but patient sorrow as left an impression never to be forgotten on the minds of those who witnessed it. Mary's counsel had not been thrown away upon Edward. The boy displayed both the delicacy and a firmness of character beyond his years and above his education. No ordinary topics of consolation were clumsily uttered to redeem his pledge to Mary, nor did he affect a stoic indifference with which he could not feel, but with the gentle endearments he drew the mourning mother to think of him, and there was healing as well as agony in the tears she shed upon his bosom. Of all this Fanny was a silent but deeply moved spectator. The widow gave her one earnest look when Mary said, "This little girl was the last person who spoke to Mchl before he was laid on the sick bed, from whence he never rose, and she seems to have loved him dearly." One long earnest look was turned upon her when this was said, but no word was spoken to her, for the time was not yet come when the bereaved mother could seek comfort in anything. Nevertheless, when Miss Brotherton rose to go, and pressing the hand of the poor sufferer in her own, promised to pay her another visit soon, Mrs. Armstrong murmured in her ear, "I should like to see that little girl again, when I can bear to name him." Mary nodded her assent, and left the mother and son to exchange thoughts and feelings which, when deep and genuine, must ever be held sacred from every unkindred eye. Most watchfully did Mary attend to this poor pensioner, and many were the hours during which she sat reading the book of life beside her bed. By degrees, too, the bereaved mother did bear to name her lost darling to Fanny Fletcher, and having once listened to the sweet tones of her gentle voice as she related all she had heard him say, all he had seemed to feel, and all he had seemed to think, the poor woman grew so enamored of the uneventful tale that she wearied not of making her repeat it. For days together Fanny would beg to be left beside her, while Edward resumed his place in the school, and Miss Brotherton often thought, when she drove to Hoxley Lane in the evenings to bring back her little protege, that she had never chanced to witness so pretty a specimen of female tenderness and pity as this lovely little girl exhibited while ministering to the poor crippled woman, whose only claim upon her love was that she wanted it, a species of claim, by the by, that is very rarely made in vain upon any uncorrupted female heart. With every want prevented, soothed by the most generous kindness, attended with the most watchful Jove, and cheered by a greater appearance of reviving health in the boy that she had thought crippled for life, that she had ever ventured to hope for, it might have been expected that the widow Armstrong would, in some degree, have forgotten past sufferings, and having once more looked forward with hope. But no, it could not be. This last, this heaviest of all her sorrows, came too late to be wrestled with, as the others had been, and though her meek nature seemed so peacefully resigned that there was more pleasure than pain in watching over her, she was, in truth, dying of a worn-out spirit and a broken heart. By some means or other, the news that little Mchl Armstrong was dead reached Dowling Lodge. Sir Matthew knit his brows, wondering how the devil anybody could have got tidings of him, but said nothing. To all the rest of the family, save one, the intelligence was too unimportant to be listened to at all. But to that one, to that already conscience-stricken and repentant Martha, it was a heavy blow. Most miserable indeed had been her state of mind for the last few months. From the day of her painful but useless visit to Miss Brotherton, her eyes had been, in a great degree, opened to the hard and avaricious nature of her father's character. Like a person excluded from the light of the sun, and seeing only by the delusive glare of an unsteady lamp, Martha had passed her whole life in mistaking the nature and the value of almost every object around her. The language of Mary Brotherton had shot with a painful and unwelcome brightness upon the dim and uncertain twilight of her moral perceptions, and the unhappy girl learned to know that the only being who had ever seemed to love her, or whom she had ever ventured to love, was one that her better reason shrunk from, and her sober judgment condemned. Yet, still he was her father, and still she loved him, and gladly, joyfully, she would have given her young life could she have thereby have changed his love of gold for love of mercy. Sometimes she thought that time and age would teach him the hollowness of his present pursuits, and that if she never left him, but ever stood ready at his side to watch some favorable moment, she might have the surpassing joy of seeing his heart open to the truth, and in a state to permit her helping to lead him to efficient repentance and the all-merciful forgiveness of God. It was impossible but that such thoughts and feelings must separate her more than ever from the rest of her family, and she had already pretty generally received the epithet of methodistical from the whole neighborhood. But she hailed it as a blessing, and without a shadow of religious enthusiasm beyond what was almost inevitably under the circumstances, and with no sectarian views or notions of whatever, poor Martha gladly sheltered herself under the imputation of both in order to avoid joining in the scenes of amusement for which she had no relish. In such a state of mind it was natural enough that Martha should deem a visit to the bereaved mother a penance which it was her duty to perform, though it was more painful to her, perhaps, than almost any other to which she could have been subjected. And she did perform it accordingly. She found the poor sufferer, whose eyes she dreaded to meet, sinking fast into peace and rest that never more could be disturbed. Miss Brotherton and Fanny were both with her. A Bible was in the hands of the former, and Miss Armstrong's countenance, though greatly more pinched and pallid than she had ever been before seen it, expressed a tranquil calmness, which it was impossible to contemplate without pleasure.